The most powerful beings in ancient Chinese mythology weren't, wizards who could fly or shoot energy from their hands.
Right. No superpowers.
Yeah, exactly. They were simply people who figured out how to just, well, stop caring. Welcome to today's deep dive.
Glad to be here.
So we're looking at this really incredible synthesis of ancient Chinese philosophy, legend, and self-cultivation. And the mission for you and me today is to completely reevaluate what an immortal actually was.
Because it's really not what pop culture tells us.
Right. If we look closely at the earliest source materials, we find something far more grounded and, frankly, much more challenging than the usual fantasy tropes.
Absolutely.
We are exploring the idea that these legendary figures were actual human beings who had just, unlocked a radically quiet, low-friction way to exist.
Yeah, and the value of the specific exploration lies entirely in how it forces us to look at our own baseline reality. Like, the ultimate goal of this deep dive isn't to uncover the secret to biological immortality.
Sure, we're not making potions here.
Exactly. Or just analyzing folklore for the sake of it. We are basically dissecting the mechanics of human energy expenditure.
Oh, I like that phrasing.
Right. Because modern life is completely defined by a staggering amount of invisible psychological combustion. We burn massive amounts of energy just navigating stress, projecting our identities, managing anxiety.
Yeah, just getting through a Tuesday takes so much out of us.
Exactly. So by stripping away all those mythological accretions, the flying on clouds stuff, and observing these ancient figures as early psychological prototypes, we uncover a profoundly different operating system for the human mind.
An operating system that runs on, minimal effort.
Right. Minimal effort yielding maximum continuity.
Okay, so to get to that operating system, we really have to bypass centuries of later religious dogma, right? And look at the foundational texts.
Specifically, the Zhuangzi.
Yes, the Zhuangzi. For those of you listening who are familiar with early Daoist thought, the Zhuangzi doesn't initially focus on immortals in that pantheonic magical sense.
No, it really doesn't.
The text utilizes this concept of the Zenrin, which is translated as the true person. And what distinguishes the true person is not some supernatural ability.
Right. They aren't shooting fireballs.
Yeah, it's actually defined by a total absence of internal turbulence. They're defined by a negative space.
Yeah, the Zenrin basically operates without the psychological friction that characterizes our standard human experience. Consider the architecture of just an average day for you or me. The typical human mind is propelled by this relentless sequence of cravings, defensive postures, and future-oriented anxieties.
Constant low-level panic.
Yes. We endure constant internal scraping against our environments and our own egos. But the earliest conception of the immortal was someone who had structurally bypassed all that entanglement.
Wait, so life still happened around them, right?
Oh, sure. Life still occurred. They still moved through the world. But the events of life just didn't catch on their psychology. They lacked the usual psychological gravity.
Wow. We tend to view that kind of resilience through a very, compartmentalized modern lens.
Oh, totally.
We isolate our well-being into specific silos. We have our dietary regimens for metabolism, and then mindfulness routines for our stress, and, somatic therapies for posture.
We treat them like totally separate departments.
Right. But the ancient Chinese framework synthesized all of this into a single unified life process. Your breath, your digestion, your physical alignment, your emotional volatility, they weren't separate at all.
No, they were mutually dependent variables in a single equation of internal combustion.
Right.
And that unified view really changes how we have to interpret the seemingly magical claims in those ancient texts.
Like the crazy diets.
Exactly. Like when a text describes an immortal as living on mist or abstaining from ordinary grains, the modern reader usually just dismisses that as pure fable, right? Or just literal starvation.
Yeah, like they literally just ate air.
Right. But if you view it as an ecological approach to the self, living on mist functions as a metaphor for a dramatically reduced metabolic and psychological demand.
Oh, I see.
The individual is no longer operating from a state of chronic, frantic depletion. The urgency to consume, whether that's food or validation or just external stimulation, has basically flatlined.
Okay, that makes the phrase breathing from the heels from the Zhuangzi make so much more sense.
Oh yeah, that's a perfect example.
Because taken literally, that is anatomical nonsense. You can't breathe through your feet.
No, you definitely can't.
But conceptually, it describes the precise opposite of the way most of us breathe. When you're stressed, you shift into a shallow, rapid chest breath.
Yeah, it's an agitated biological response to a threat.
Exactly. So heel breathing represents a state of total structural integration. It's an existence that is so deeply rooted and unforced that the breath just seems to rise from the ground up, moving through a completely unconstricted system.
Unconstricted, exactly.
It honestly reminds me of the difference between turbulent and laminar flow in fluid dynamics.
Oh, wow. That is an incredibly precise framework for this.
Yeah, so like if you push water through a pipe with way too much pressure, or if the pipe is full of jagged edges, you get turbulent flow.
Right. It's messy.
Yeah, the water's chaotic, it eddies, it creates massive resistance, and it loses a ton of energy as heat and noise. I mean, that is our modern, highly agitated existence.
Just burning energy as noise.
Exactly. But the true person, the early immortal, represents laminar flow. The fluid moves in these smooth, parallel layers with almost zero disruption. The water is still moving forward, maybe even with immense power, but there is no friction. It is entirely silent.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Because the historical observers who interacted with people in this laminar state, they wouldn't have understood the fluid dynamics of it, obviously.
Sure.
But they absolutely recognized the physical outcome, which was that these individuals were remarkably difficult to wear down.
They just didn't get exhausted.
Right. So the legends surrounding figures like Pengzu, who supposedly lived for centuries, or those enigmatic hermits in the mountains, those didn't stem from observations of literal magic.
Wait, really? So it was just observation?
Yeah, they stemmed from observing an anomalous rate of decay. These individuals eroded at a fraction of the normal human speed because they just weren't wasting their vital energy on internal turbulence. The friction wasn't grinding them down.
Okay, here's where I think this concept hits a pretty significant philosophical hurdle for the modern mindset.
Okay, let's hear it.
If we conceptualize the ideal state as the total elimination of craving, ambition, and, psychological turbulence, we really run the risk of conflating non-action wu-wei with absolute apathy.
Yeah, the blank slate problem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you remove all the drive that propels a person forward, the assumption is that the person just becomes a blank slate. Like, without the hunger for more, isn't the resulting personality essentially indistinguishable from a houseplant?
It's a very fair question, and it's a fundamental anxiety of the modern ego, honestly. We completely conflate identity with striving.
Right, like our hustle makes us who we are.
Exactly. We assume that our frantic desires are the scaffolding of our personalities. But the source material provides a really fascinating counter-argument through the later folklore of the Eight Immortals.
Oh, I love the Eight Immortals.
Right. These figures are deeply embedded in Chinese cultural history, and they are the complete antithesis of the blank, emotionless saint.
Yeah, the Eight Immortals are famously chaotic. They are incredibly eccentric, highly individualized, and just vividly human.
Very human.
You have figures who are playfully belligerent, wandering scholars who get into absurd situations, and characters defined by this deep, dignified compassion. They are definitely not staring blankly at a wall.
No, not
They are
correct.
engaging with the world in very specific, idiosyncratic ways.
And the presence of those idiosyncrasies leads us to basically the most compelling psychological model in the source material. It's the hypothesis of the two layers of desire.
The two layers, okay.
Yeah. To understand how an immortal maintains a vibrant personality without that internal friction, we have to categorize our motivation. So the first layer is deficiency-driven desire.
Deficiency-driven, meaning based on lack.
Exactly. This is the neurosis. It's motivation born from a profound sense of lack, a fear of irrelevance, or just that agonizing feeling that something inside the self is broken and has to be fixed through external achievement.
Oh, man.
It is the voice that dictates you have to secure that promotion or acquire a specific status symbol or even just dominate a conversation to validate your existence.
So the deficiency layer is the turbulent flow, is the agitated water just scraping against the pipe.
Exactly.
And that is the layer the immortal completely sheds.
Yes, the immortal totally discards the deficiency, but the second layer remains untouched, and that is structural desire.
Structural desire, what exactly does that look like?
Well, structural desire is not born from a deficit. It's just the enduring morphology of the individual. It encompasses your natural affinities, your aesthetic preferences, your baseline temperament, and your unique cognitive style.
Like the things you just naturally enjoy.
Exactly. It is the shape of the riverbed through which your life naturally flows.
Wow. Let me unpack this, because that distinction completely reframes the concept of self-cultivation.
Yeah.
I mean, we have built an entire global culture around celebrating the hustle,
Oh,
essentially glorifying the deficiency layer.
100%.
We treat our panic, our imposter syndrome, and our desperate need for validation as the actual engines of our success.
We think we need them to survive.
Right. And the revelation here is that this panic isn't our core identity at all. It's just the noise of the engine failing.
Yes.
The structural desire, your perception, your intellect, your specific sense of humor, none of that requires the terror of failure to exist. It functions perfectly well, maybe even better, when the panic is completely removed.
It functions so much better. The structural self is entirely self-sustaining. In fact, the text really invites a rigorous self-audit here. It asks the reader to evaluate their immediate ambitions and basically trace them back to their origins.
So that sounds confronting.
It is. I will pose this directly to you, the listener. Just examine the goals currently occupying your mental bandwidth.
Yeah, think about what you're stressing over today.
Right. How many of those pursuits are genuine expressions of your natural structure, and how many are simply elaborate mechanisms designed by your brain to temporarily medicate a deep-seated feeling of lack?
Ugh, that audit reveals the terrifying reality for most of us, honestly.
Hmm.
Because the vast majority of our actions are just highly sophisticated attempts to manage that deficiency.
Yously.
And recognizing this creates an immediate desire to pivot. The logical next step, once we identify the exhausting nature of this deficiency-driven life, is to seek out the protocol to eliminate it.
Of course. Give me the steps.
Right. If the low-friction state is the optimal human condition, the modern reflex is to ask for the curriculum. We want the breathing techniques, the meditative postures, the specific dietary restrictions required to engineer this state of being.
And that exact reflex brings us to the central, intractable paradox of the early Daoist texts.
The paradox being,
The critical mechanism for achieving the state of the true person is that it absolutely cannot be achieved through conscious trying. The state of low friction cannot be willed into existence through deliberate, goal-oriented action.
it's the paradox of striving to not strive.
Exactly.
Because the very formulation of the thought like, I'm going to implement a strict meditation protocol so I can eliminate my deficiency-driven desires, that is itself a deficiency-driven desire.
It absolutely is. You're trying to fix a lack.
Yeah, it relies on a cognitive split.
Yeah.
You create an internal monitor, an ego, that basically observes your performance and judges whether you are being immortal enough. And that self-monitoring creates the exact psychological friction you are attempting to escape in the first place.
It does. And the source material addresses this explicitly when discussing advanced physiological concepts like TEXI or embryonic breathing.
Okay, embryonic breathing.
Yeah, TEXI is often misinterpreted today as this highly technical, forceful manipulation of the respiratory system.
Like holding your breath for a specific count.
Right. But the original texts argue the complete opposite. Embryonic breathing, much like heel breathing or the broader state of the Zenrin, is not a target to be struck.
It's a result.
Exactly. It's a natural phenomenon that emerges spontaneously from the subconscious. But it only rises to the surface when the willful conscious layer of trying has thinned out sufficiently to actually allow it.
So you don't build this state of ease. You just stop interfering with it.
Precisely.
Oh man, that makes me look at the later developments in Daoist history in a completely different light. Because centuries after the Zhuangzi, you see the rise of incredibly complex alchemical traditions, right?
Yeah.
Niden or internal alchemy.
Oh, yeah. Huge shift.
These schools developed encyclopedic manuals with hundreds of rigid sequential steps for circulating energy, regulating diet, achieving immortality.
It got very complicated.
It seems like they took a profound observation about the spontaneous cessation of effort and inadvertently transformed it into the ultimate deficiency-driven optimization program.
They absolutely did. And the historical trajectory there is a perfect demonstration of the human tendency to bureaucratize the profound.
Bureaucratize the profound. That's so accurate.
Right. Because the earliest observers recognized the biological and psychological ease that manifests when a human being simply stops forcing their existence.
Yeah.
But natural ease is really difficult to commodify or teach.
You can't sell not trying.
You can't. So subsequent generations codified the results of that ease into a rigid curriculum.
Yeah.
When you take a state of being that is defined by the absence of striving and you turn it into a 100-step program requiring extreme ascetic discipline, you have fundamentally altered the mechanism.
You've broken the machine by trying to fix it.
Exactly. The true immortal condition operates on a deeper psychological stratum where the engine of trying has just been permanently powered down.
This highlights such a fascinating parallel with our current optimization and biohacking
Oh,
culture.
definitely.
I mean, we have individuals tracking their REM sleep with perfectly calibrated sensors and aggressively regulating their cortisol levels and basically turning peace of mind into a competitive sport.
Yes.
It is the exact same trap. They are trying to forcefully hack their way into a state of laminar flow, which creates immense turbulence in the process.
Tons of turbulence.
Which brings us to the sociological implication of this entire philosophy.
Yeah.
Because if the low-friction state requires the total abandonment of performance and self-monitoring,
Right.
the people who actually achieve it are structurally guaranteed to be invisible to the rest of us.
They are completely off the radar, and the historical record is inherently compromised by survival bias here. The text explores the scarcity of these individuals through a few intersecting realities.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is simply the prerequisite conditions. Achieving a state where the deficiency engine completely shuts down is not solely a matter of intellectual realization.
It's not just reading the right book.
No. It likely requires a highly specific conjunction of neurobiology, environmental stability, early life development, and temperament.
Wow.
It's an emergent property of a complex system, meaning it naturally occurs in a vanishingly small percentage of the population.
So there's a huge biological and environmental lottery aspect to it.
Very much so.
But even if the prerequisite conditions were more common, the psychological profile of the true person essentially guarantees their obscurity. I mean, if you have completely shed the deficiency layer, you have zero motivation to engage in self-display.
None whatsoever.
The impulse to build a legacy, to establish a following, or to brand your spiritual attainment is entirely rooted in the need for external validation. The true person lacks that need.
They don't care.
Right. In a modern context, the individual who has truly mastered the low-friction life is fundamentally incapable of becoming a self-help guru or an influencer.
Oh, totally.
But the ultimate anti-influencer. Their operating system does not support the software required for personal branding.
They live no trace in the cultural consciousness because they just refuse to manipulate the culture for their own aggrandizement. I mean, human history, particularly the way we curate and record it, is almost exclusively an archive of deficiency-driven behavior.
Oh, wow. That's so true.
We record the actions of conquerors, hyper-ambitious innovators, and individuals whose internal lack was so vast it literally drove them to reshape nations.
Right.
So we suffer from a profound survival bias where the quiet, low-wear individual who lives a deeply contented, continuous life in a local community, they just register as a historical nullity.
They just don't make the history books.
Yeah.
We have engineered a global society that defines success solely by the volume of friction a person is willing to endure and overcome.
Exactly. We applaud the suffering.
We really do. We idolize the executive who functions on 3 hours of sleep, the entrepreneur who bankrupts themselves 3 times before succeeding, and the artist who suffers endlessly for their work. We worship the heat and the noise of the turbulent flow.
We absolutely worship it.
And the ancient Chinese immortal, one stripped of all the mythology, represents a catastrophic threat to that value system. It proposes a metric for success based entirely on the absence of wear, the slowness of exhaustion, and the quiet continuity of the organism.
And that's why the utility of examining the Zenrin today is not to, romantically long for an escape to a misty mountain somewhere.
Right. We're not telling people to abandon society.
No, it's to utilize their framework as a diagnostic tool for our own lives. The source material challenges us to differentiate between the structures that truly define us and the deficiency-driven engines that are slowly burning us out. The goal is to identify the areas of our daily existence where we are forcefully driving the machinery of our lives for no other reason than a phantom sense of lack. By recognizing that turbulent flow, we create the possibility of occasionally shifting into neutral and just allowing our structural momentum to carry us forward without the relentless application of force.
It really is a radical reframing of what it means to be effective. The immortals weren't defying the laws of physics. They were just observing the laws of psychology with terrifying clarity.
Terrifying clarity.
They realized that the hardest thing a human being can do is stop trying to justify their own existence through friction.
Yes.
Well, before we end this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought to process, something for you to mull over that builds directly on this idea of the invisible, low-friction life.
I love this part.
Think about the people in our society that the cultural consensus currently labels as unambitious. the individuals we dismiss as unproductive, or those who seem perfectly content to live an entirely average, uncelebrated existence. We are so conditioned to view them as failing at the hustle.
Mm.
But what if they aren't failing at all?
Right.
What if some of those invisible, unremarkable people have quietly solved the exact equation we've been discussing today? What if the person coasting through an average life with zero desire for legacy is actually much closer to the legendary elevated state of the immortal than any of the stressed-out, hyper-optimized billionaires we are told to emulate?